Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. Back during Earth's Mesozoic, mammals were very restricted in niche biodiversity. After the asteroid impact, one of the earliest clades to diversify into new niches were the Leptictida. This clade had members back during the Mesozoic, though they are most known for their teeth. During the Eocene, around 50 million years ago, the lineage produced their most famous member, Leptictidium. While they were very basal eutherian mammals, possibly not even placental mammals, they had their own derived traits, such as specialized hind limbs that made them adapted for possibly hopping, although some studies suggest a running gait is more likely. They were highly successful in their day, rooting through the underbrush of the abundant jungles after worms and insects. As Earth cooled and jungles gave way to grassland, the Leptictids declined. It appears that they were endangered by the end of the Eocene, with a possibly quadrupedal Leptictus, perhaps lasting into the early Oligocene. Out on Kaimere, around 30 million years ago, volcanic activity in southern Nicar caused a regional extinction that triggered a harvest from North America and Europe. Although other Nicari dinosaurs repopulated, denying large mammals time to establish a dynasty of their own, many mammal groups like entelodonts, hyenodonts, nimmervids, camels, and rhinos found tenures as predators and herbivores ranging between 100 and even 1,000 pounds. Brontotheres were the breakout stars of this harvest in terms of size, lasting for a few million years and rivaling large proboscideans for heavyweight titles of mammal clades before their eventual extinction. Large placentals and other eutherians found much greater success. Pangolins, bats, rodents, and shrews all spread far and wide. Native multituberculates and other non-therian mammals meant that they didn't enjoy total dominion of the mammal niches, not to mention competition with lizards, rhynchocephalians, pterosaurs, birds, and other small dinosaurs, but they all became a staple in some capacity throughout Nicar and Kairul at this time. Leptictids also became a common sight in Kaimere's fossil record at this time. This has caused a degree of confusion. While some argue they might be descended from Mesozoic lineages, it would not explain their absence earlier in the fossil record. While fossils of Leptictis itself have been found as recently as 1 million years prior to harvest, lasting 1 million years after the most recent fossil record would hardly be unprecedented, and the earliest and most abundant fossils are proportioned much more like Leptictidium, which perished much earlier in the Eocene. The presence of Brontotheres in Kaimere, 4 million years after their last fossils on Earth, have also led to skepticism surrounding the dates proposed for the mid-dynasty harvest, with some suggesting it was actually in the Eocene, as such clades as hyenodonts and camelids found in Kaimere's fossil records dating between 30 and 29 million years ago resemble Earth counterparts perhaps through convergent evolution. It is entirely possible that they are not yet fossils discovered in the immediate aftermath of the harvest itself. After all, the events don't leave any trace, just as fossils of flora and fauna collected after, though it is conspicuous that a spike in pollen fossils corresponding to North American Oligocene taxa is found, but nothing in the strata below 30 million years ago. A theory amongst assembly paleontologists has gained support in recent years that the fossils of Brontotheres, Leptictids, and other classically Eocene fauna are a result of the fossil record bias on Earth. The Oligocene was more arid than the Eocene, and many forests were replaced by mosaics and grasslands, which resulted in subsequent extinctions in many forest specialists. Woodlands, especially rainforests, are notoriously poor in fossil preservation. However, this doesn't mean that forests were entirely absent. A similar theory is believed to explain a specimen of semi-amorph sloths appearing in Kaimere's fossil record as they are today, despite not having any record on Earth. It must be stressed that rainforest fossils are not impossible, just a matter of low chances of preservation compared to other habitats. Harvests are under no obligation to coincide with eras with represented Earth fossil formations at all, much less those with good preservation, so the fact that many animals in Kaimere don't have obvious ancestors preserved in our own fossil record should not come as a surprise. From Nikar's fossil record, and what can be gleaned from the sparse sampling of Kairul's record, it appears Leptictids may have come during the Cretaceous, but experienced a substantial boom during the second half of the Tyrant Dynasty since Oligocene Harvests. While pangolins became the dominant presence as arboreal insectivores and alvarezsaurs held onto this niche in open territories, Leptictids did very well hunting insects on the forest floors. They were not without their competition, but being quickly diversified and erupted in population all the same. While many mammals declined during the rest of the dynasty as their niches were replaced by a range of indigenous mammals and dinosaurs, Leptictids were a definite success story. This all changed during the dynastic extinction. Much of their range in Nikar was quashed during the volcanism that ended the reign of the tyrannosaurs. While rainforests and many of their fauna recovered, for the most part, newly arrived flora taking over gave newly arrived fauna a better chance at initial success. Leptictids may have persisted in Nikar for a little while, but it doesn't seem to have taken long for them to buckle under the invasive pressure. A few seem to have desperately specialized to the new conditions, only to be finally extinguished when Titanosaurs came from Kairul and reshaped the land back to the general conditions to which the Leptictids had been forced to specialize away from. The story in Kairul, however, is much different. This continent was not hit nearly as hard as Nikar, especially as wind currents and a mountain range shielded many regions from the worst of the smoke and ash. The megafauna still generally perished, but this sanctuary is theorized to have been what spared the last of the titanosaurs, who would later reshape the continents. The Leptictids were among the many animals which thrived as the Titans retook the continent. Today, there have been dozens of species documented by the few assembly faunal surveys of Kairul. It is clear that while they perished in the known world, Kairul was still their Eden. Most of these, like the trunked possum, are not dramatically different from their ancestors. They forage for insects and small game in the forest floors of Titan gardens and dense jungles. As extremely keen sense of smell aids them in their search for and capture of prey. Their metabolisms are very demanding, so arid forests and prairies are generally out of the question as there's usually not nearly enough food, and their build generally prohibits survival in wetlands. Though the marsh possum is proof that most rules in the natural world have their exceptions, and is found throughout the marshes and swamps of Kairul's western peninsula. The marsh possum is a quadruped, perhaps aiding their survival in this niche, unconventional for their clade by having a more stable stance. Most other Leptictids are bipeds, and while some ancestors may have been argued to possibly have a hopping gait, all known Chimeran taxa walk with an alternating stride, and even when quadrupedal, bound or trot, rather than adopting a hopping run. While their success in the Tyrant Dynasty appears to have largely been restricted to small insectivore niches, they followed the trend of adaptive radiation as seen in many mammal and small dinosaur clades in the aftermath of the extinction. One lineage grew quite large on a diet of termite and conifer mite colonies. The largest of this lineage is an animal called the Dudruko, which often is compared to a sloth bear in niche and size. According to treatises of the Great Library, much larger species are found deeper inland. Another unexpected turn for this group was as macropredators. The Burud is a solitary predator in the Titan Gardens of Kairul. They are bipedal runners, drawing many comparisons to cockatrices in appearance. They generally prefer smaller game like multituberculates, young dinosaurs, thescelosaurs, groundfowl, and their own smaller cousins, though there have been a few accounts of them tackling larger game such as young rhinos, camelids, pachycephalosaurs, and even juvenile titans several times their size. They possess a very powerful bite, though this is mostly to establish a hold while they pierce game with large claws on their hands and kick with powerful legs, further drawing comparisons to theropod dinosaurs. Like a borzoi hound, their trunk-like snouts allow them to breathe and keep a firm bite on thrashing prey. Burud are by no means common, with surveys suggesting cockatrice in their size range outnumber them 20 or 30 to 1, but they, along with a few nimmervids, multituberculates like the komatu, borophagians, aquatic hyaenodonts, and of course the entelodonts, are proof that even in this continent dominated by large dinosaurs, mammals have proven more than capable of holding their own even in macro-predatory niches. Despite a long-held assumption that Leptictids were an endemic Kairulan clade, acquisition of a type specimen in 2014 proves that this lineage does have at least one representative in the known world, Lazarus. They live in the foothill jungles of the Eastern Crescent. Very little is known about them. Like the marsh possum, they have evolved a more quadrupedal gait than their ancestors, likely an adaptation to foraging in uneven terrain. Even so, they readily stand on their hind legs while feeding to keep a lookout. They have superb sense of smell and hearing, enabling them to maraud through the underbrush, missing very little and deftly evading predators by fleeing long before they themselves have been found. Males and females are barely distinguishable and tend to live in loose colonies of a dozen or so individuals, with most foraging alone or near others of the group at night, but sleeping in shared dens during the day. Though long assumed to be fairly unintelligent animals, the encephalization quotient of Lazarus is quite high, supported by their surprising social complexity. Even the giant Burud of Kairul that, while being a solitary hunter, also appears to live in small groups if initial accounts are to be believed, and it is likely that future studies will further illuminate what might otherwise have been dismissed as solitary habitats in other Leptictids. While this lineage is far from the diversity and success of eons past, they have held on in both Kairul and a small corner of the known world, proving more capable and resilient than they had opportunities to demonstrate on Earth. Cheers and thanks to Rufus for sponsoring this episode. A giant predatory Leptictid was actually one of the first creatures designed for Kaimere, as seen on one of the maps of the project from back in 2006, so it was very fun to remake them as the Burud for Kairul's forests. Next week is a survey of the polar oceans of the Northern Hemisphere, which I'm very excited to showcase. Thank you all so much to my Patreon patrons for your support, thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next week. Cheers, folks!